make of the pregame show?
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Taco Comfort Solutions.
Honestly, just thinking, it seems like an impossible task to keep up with this impeachment trial, right? Because we record our programs each afternoon around 1 o'clock when the proceedings will begin for today. Obviously, we'll have to react to last night. So, but, you know, not everyone's watching this thing the way media is, and it's kind of a catch as catch can type of thing. It's a really big deal that hasn't risen to a really big deal in some ways, right? But Joe Cammarano, our political scientist from Providence College, is here to help me work through it again tonight. And we'll just start that way. In the meantime, a couple of things happening locally that I think are important. By the way, welcome in. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday evening. Pardon my glasses. Senate Committee 3D Guns headline. So there's consensus across most boards here for this legislation, which is good. Cooler heads have prevailed, and even key members of the Second Amendment community, if you will. Not that we all shouldn't be, sort of, but the Second Amendment community kind of at least playing the neutral game here and not fighting this. This is about homemade guns, 3D guns, computer graphic design, printing. Have you seen 3D printing? It's not as complicated as you would think it is. But it's homemade guns, and they're unregistered, and they don't have serial numbers, and they're being made on a profound level, and we're going to legislate against them, which is fine. Here's the thing. I don't know that the people who make 3D guns will care. So you could say, well, it's kind of a useless exercise. Well, it's a statement, and perhaps it'll shake some people away from the production of 3D guns. But it seems to me, for the most part, the people who use 3D guns nefariously will find a way to make 3D guns anyway, right? But at least there was less acrimony on Smith Hill about it yesterday. I think that's a little bit of a good thing. Meanwhile, there is acrimony and real anger on the part of the cultivators of medical marijuana. This headline reflects their stepping out, and we've done X number of shows here on television and on radio about this. We have a really strange situation going on in this state right now. The state, 3 years ago, legislated the opportunity for cultivators, meaning people who grow pot, to sell it legally only to the compassion centers. The compassion centers are the medical marijuana depots, if you will, the stores for people who have the medical marijuana card, some 18,000 in the state, to go in and buy their product legally. There are 3 in Portsmouth and Warwick and in Providence. Okay, so that was the setup. Now, and what you need to know, if you don't know already, that the 3 compassion centers only purchase, well, they only sell 1/3 of their own capacity. It's all they can grow. So they buy the rest from the cultivators. And so there's some 51 cultivators in the state, probably too many. But there's some multi-million-dollar business operations that have started because the legislation was created for them to supply. Now the General Assembly wants to add 6 more compassion centers at a $500,000 license fee apiece. And they want them to be able to grow their own stuff. And that's going to tilt the capacity situation. It's going to put the cultivators out of business. Well, the state cultivated the cultivator business. And so the cultivators are going, what up with that? And I have every right in the world to ask that question. So there's got to be some common sense here about the retail business being primary for medical marijuana stores rather than just cultivating their own stuff. Seems like a simple solution, but nothing's ever simple when the politics are at play here and when the money is the real concern. In the meantime, the governor's office is probably pretty bullish on the cultivators staying in business, but they're not going to fight because Governor Raimondo doesn't fight over anything. She'll put her toe in the water on a point, but she'll never fight for it. Blind on a veto is another example. But she's also quite the manipulator herself. And when it comes to recreational marijuana, out of the clear blue sky in the budget comes this $20 million end of next fiscal year put from recreational marijuana stores, kind of like New Hampshire liquor stores, that she wants to set up. And people are asking her, like, where did this come from and what was the motivation? And yesterday, for the second time on the record, she told the local press that she's being pushed by a certain group.
As I said, I have an obligation to do what I think is right. That proposal is a new proposal. It would be first of its kind in the country. I was kind of pushed in that direction by public safety, members of the public safety community, state police and law officers. They should look at it. They should look at it. They should do hearings. They should listen to experts. And I hope at the end of the day they'll enact it. But obviously, as you say, at the end of the day, that's their decision.
Yeah, I'm thinking law enforcement pushed her to do this? So I asked the colonel of the state police yesterday, and he sent me a text answer because he was busy testifying on 3D homemade guns, right? He says, the issue of marijuana is already here in Rhode Island. Rhode Island State Police encounters a significant number of motorists every day who are impaired by marijuana. Law enforcement needs the resources to address this critical public safety issue that isn't going away. Strict regulation would provide for DREs, which are drug recognition experts, and increased patrols of our highways and roadways. Makes sense. He's not pushing for state-owned recreational stores. And I couldn't even get a comment from the Rhode Island Association of Police Chiefs, meaning she made this up, which she does from time to time. And I think it's going to hurt her in her effort to get this done, which is okay because they just threw it against the wall and hope it would stick. We'll follow. It's crazy. Here's a little tidbit. Look at this headline. Now, this is a rarely innocuous story. The State Board of Elections is, I don't know, putting like $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 aside for the I voted stickers. You know, you put these things on your chest after you vote. And they want a little contest to make it more creative. And first of all, I never put those things on my chest because there's nobody's damn business that I voted. Secondly, what is the Board of Elections doing marketing elections? Their job is to regulate elections, not to be cheerleaders for elections. I'm miffed by this. And my guess is that my guest is going to stick it down my throat, which is what I love. I didn't even prep you on that one. You always come at me on the first one, so I figured I didn't even tell you.
I want to know what the miffing is.
I'm miffed.
Why?
The state, you see, here we go.
You donate blood. You get a big guy donated today. You know, this is called an incentive.
You know what?
A very mild incentive.
That
it works.
is a perfect, you walked right into it this time, Professor.
Why?
When you donate blood.
Yeah. You get a pound of coffee sometimes.
It is the general consensus that you need, we need blood centers and we need to donate blood.
And we need citizens voting.
Citizens voting is a personal responsibility and or obligation and or right. It's a right. It's not something that ought to be solicited. I don't want my taxpayer money soliciting, motivating you to vote. So I walk by you in the supermarket with my little I voted, and it dawns on you, ding dong, that okay, got it. Oh my God, I have to go vote too. And most naturally what will happen is some knucklehead who hasn't paid attention to any issue just wanders into a voting booth, completely unwitting to what the issues are or the candidates are, and votes. I don't need to, I'm about quality versus quantity at the voter booth. America needs smart voters, and we don't need to be cheerleading people to vote. If you're not smart enough and excited enough about the democracy to vote on your own, you don't need my taxpayer money incentivizing you to wake up.
I think I know what your wife needs to get you for your birthday.
What?
A book on meditation. You need to chill. You know, this is a very
common, this drives me
minimalist
nuts.
approach to encourage. Why?
More
voting
I just
is
explained
always
it to you.
better. More voting is always better.
Why?
Because you don't have true democracy if the majority of people stay home.
You don't have true democracy if the majority of people are ignorant to the issues.
People who go out and vote usually spend some time trying to figure out which person to vote for, which issues to vote for. It's not perfect, but having someone vote is better than having someone not vote. I think you're wrong on this. I think you need to chill out.
The purpose is to generate
it's-
voter interest in the election. That is not the purpose of the Board of Elections.
Well,
the Board of Elections is there to regulate elections
But remember,
and to
I
adjudicate
voted-
elections, not to
Nah.
cheerlead for
This
elections.
is for election day, because these aren't handed out till election day.
Yeah.
So it's a way of spreading. It's like social contagion theory. You know, people will see it and they'll go, oh, I'm going to go vote too. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. You need to relax on this.
Impeachment, when we come back. I knew it. By the way, the rest of the show's canceled. I just, you know, if I can't bring the political scientists into a seriousness about voting, then I just can't conduct this conversation anymore. Anyway, Kev started with the headline, so you can't see me laughing. Yeah, 13 hours of fiery debate. Well, I don't know how fiery it was. I gave it all I had till 1 o'clock in the morning last night, and it beat me, and I finally just turned it off. Here's an update from what was the Rules Day yesterday.
House managers will start laying out their case, arguing President Trump withheld military aid in exchange for Ukraine announcing an investigation into his political rival.
The first article, abuse of power, charges the president with soliciting a foreign power to help him cheat in the next election.
The president's lawyers get their chance to refute those charges later this week, but White House counsel Pat Cipollone summed up their case Tuesday.
These articles of impeachment do not begin to approach the standard required by the Constitution.
Early this morning, Republicans approved the rules for the trial after voting down all 11 Democratic amendments to include additional documents and witnesses.
As a consequence, the impeachment trial of President Trump begins with a cloud hanging over it.
Debate over the trial rules lasted for 12 hours, with some lawmakers growing restless and arguments between the two sides getting heated at times.
Executive privilege is a shield, not a sword. It cannot be used to block a witness who is willing to testify. It's embarrassing the president's counsels would talk about this today.
The only one who should be embarrassed, Mr. Nadler, is you.
Chief Justice John Roberts rebuked both sides and urged them to practice civil discourse.
Those addressing the Senate should remember where they are.
During a news conference this morning in Switzerland, President Trump responded, calling Congressman Jerry Nadler a sleazebag, and he was asked if he would like to attend the trial.
I don't know. I'd sort of love to sit right in the front row and stare at their corrupt faces.
The president admitted his lawyers probably don't want him there.
What do you want to talk about? You know, I think about this institutionally, that I study the presidency. The presidency will survive. I think those of us who are concerned about presidencies getting too strong, too powerful, are kind of worried about what we know is going to happen. That's acquittal. Because then that means that presidents can do anything they want and they're not subject to any kind of regulation while in office. It's only the election. And what happens after they get re-elected, there's no constraints at all for 4 years. That's problematic.
The bluster of the president aside, you know, the macho, I want to stare him down type of thing. He said something else that wasn't in the package today, and that was that when the perfect call transcript was released, Democrats panicked because it didn't match up to the story that the whistleblower told, which is just absolutely factually perfectly incorrect. But he doubled it down by saying, and by the way, I've got the we've got the documents, they don't have them, meaning I'm good in this whole thing, which is the exact second article of impeachment description. It's the obstruction of Congress. He literally, on that microphone yesterday, explained to the American people exactly what the charge against him is. I just don't understand the times that stuff, it didn't go unnoticed. Mm-hmm. But in Trump world...
Well, part of the problem is the complexity and nuance of addressing that makes it very difficult because everything's happening so fast and new things are happening every hour. I do think that that's a problem, but I'm not that surprised. President Trump doesn't seem to understand the difference between his own personal documents and the public's documents. And there's a long statutory, legal, and constitutional history of these documents are not they're not the president's. They are the people's documents. Richard Nixon discovered that.
And what was fascinating, watching the trial last night, when the Democrats were actually using some documents that they have not been able to secure from the White House. And I'm thinking, holy cow, FOIA requests,
Right.
you know, Freedom of Information Act requests by other agencies have been able to extract some documents and show the discrepancies between that which the White House would even, black out. The whole thing is just, the information part of this whole thing is off the rails, and then of course it's the whole witness debate.
Well, one of the things that makes presidents so strong is they do have control over all the information and expertise of the executive branch. And so when Congress asks for it, the executive branch doesn't have to give it to them in a way that the law requires it to give it to the press. So ironically, members of the press probably have a better shot at getting this stuff than members of Congress. When you have somebody who doesn't see these as public documents or documents that should be shared when requested with other divisions of government.
We got a fascinating situation going here. Mitch McConnell, reportedly on pressure from moderate Republicans, the 3 or 4, and that's a big if, right? 3 or 4 is the magic number here at this point. Is Lamar Alexander the 4th? You know, is there a hidden 4th when it comes down to next week's stuff? But it's amazing to me that they're going to, with this particular case, run 3 days, not 2 days. They stretch it out a little bit for each side to make their case over 24 hours of real-time presentation time. And then then the senators will get their chance to ask questions in writing. And then they'll vote on whether documents and witnesses will come into the case. Well, wouldn't you want to ask questions in writing based on what you've seen in terms of witness testimony and documents?
Well, only if you want to go in with an open mind about the result. And unfortunately, I think both sides, but I think it's more acute on the Republican side, there generally aren't open minds, that they know what they want as an outcome, and they're going to rig the system to get to that outcome. And so the process is not determined by what's fair, what's good for the American people. It's determined by what makes sense for the outcome.
There is some scuttle. Washington Post was reporting today that there's some serious backroom conversation going on a trade. It's the Biden for Bolton trade, getting John Bolton to testify in exchange for Joe or a Hunter Biden. If I'm the Republicans, I think, be careful what you ask for. I mean, Biden, Joe Biden, is very comfortable in that setting, and Hunter Biden, is a dope for taking that deal. A dope, and he's going to hurt his father's candidacy in 2020. I don't have any doubt about that. But what does he know about this case? Sit there and say, I'm unaware. I don't know what you're talking about. Well, not me. I don't know what you're doing.
I don't see it happening, but it's tit for tat. If you can cloud and fog things up even more, yeah, he's bad, he's dumb, he doesn't deserve the $50,000 a month, supposedly, that he was compensated. We all know that.
Well, look, if Democrats are hell-bent on getting John Bolton in, they should make that deal.
I agree. No, I don't agree. I agree they should push for John Bolton. I think...
You don't think they should make the deal for Hunter Biden?
No, I don't. I'm sorry. This is why
are they there?
I'm in politics.
Are they there to protect Joe Biden's candidacy, or are they there to get the answers?
Well, but remember, the human harm that you could do to someone who is essentially a fairly fragile person, evidently.
Who?
Hunter Biden. He's got all sorts of addictions. Remember, he was in the car when his mother died in the head-on collision. Very traumatic. Obviously, he hasn't fully recovered in the way that Bo did. But, I don't want to destroy a human being. I don't think it's worth it. They're not going to acquit Trump, so why put Bolton up for Hunter Biden? Just get Bolton. Right. If you can't get Bolton, don't make that trade. I think that's immoral.
All right, well, I think that's...
Well, unethical. I don't think it's immoral.
Well, there's a fine line between the two, right?
Yeah.
So it might be early to make a projection, but what does the American public say to a non-witness trial when we come back? Stay with us.
I never see them talking about the transcription. I never see them talking about the call because there's nothing to say. You read it. Somebody should just sit there and read it, and everybody's going to say, You mean that's an impeachable event? If that were impeachable, Lyndon Johnson would have had to leave office in his first day. Kennedy would have had to leave office his first day. It's a hoax.
He's writing his own history books. What does he know about Lyndon Johnson and Kennedy?
Why would he need to know anything? He can just use them. Yeah, look, President Trump makes things up to suit his needs. Right. We know that.
Right.
So let's not worry about it.
Okay, so what's the answer to the question? I think this is going to be a little more widely primetime viewed on cable than most normal cycles over this week. At the same time, and I think more people will get an orientation to what the whole story is. Maybe even the senators will. But a 53-47 outcome and no witnesses, if that happens, how does the American public digest it?
Well, I think the reality is we're already at the point where we know that the resolution is going to be in November. That, you know, this is sort of...
Yeah, but how does this impact the resolution in November? Does it?
I think it does.
The no witness thing, is it a battle won and a war lost for the Republicans?
I think very well might be, and I think Republicans could suffer consequences if that 5 to 7% that are in the middle who voted for Trump, but would have voted for a Democrat had it not been Hillary on the ticket. I think if they lose them, they may lose a few more seats, and they could, long shot, lose the Senate. But we don't know. It's really close, and it's going to be a referendum on Trump. So all the elections in November are going to be a referendum on Trump. Doesn't matter who's on the ticket. Susan Collins, Cory Gardner, referendum on Trump. It's not about them this year. It's about Trump, and that's exactly what he was hoping for.
Well, I'm wondering whether or not that's a bad play. Listen, if you're going to acquit him anyway, throw some witnesses in there and don't give them the bone to say that there was an unfair trial. I mean, if the outcome is guaranteed, what's the play here? I'm missing this.
Well, I do think that there might be 3, 4, 5, 6 votes for a couple witnesses, regardless of whether it's a deal. So it's possible. And then they're going to acquit him. So yeah, I think that tactically, that would make sense for the Susan Collins of the world.
Collins, Murkowski, Romney, and who's the fourth?
Gardner, and dark horse Lamar Alexander. But he was, he's what I would call a moderate, but he doesn't make a big deal about it. So I would say if he flips and he's the first vote, then something's happening.
Any chance over this next week this thing blows up?
I doubt it. No, I think it's a foregone conclusion. I heard the arguments yesterday, and it was like watching 2 student presentations: the star students and the ones who didn't do the work. And the ones who didn't do the work are going to get the A. That's what it felt like.
So it happens in your class?
No, and that's why it was so distressing. But there's no argument to make on the president's side. There's silly arguments.
Got it. Thank you, Professor. I'm going to get a sticker for you. I voted. Final word on the Hall of Fame next. Derek Jeter to the Hall of Fame. No surprise. Got every vote but one. So now the great Yankee reliever is still the only one to ever go in unanimously. You're not going to show me and how disgusted I am? I guess not. Well, there I am. I'm disgusted. Who is that rat fink that didn't vote for Derek Jeter? Dan York's State of Mind investigation shall be launched. Good night.